didn't do that.
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. When we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 16, we're going to blah, blah, blah as we discover the good stories in Hotel Transylvania. All right, Simon, first things first, my family has just been in a household of sickness. We are a home of disease over the last 6 days. Yeah. And so I'm, kind of straggling in here with a sore throat and piecing things together. And what better way to stress those vocal cords out than to hang out and talk about a movie? So thanks for bearing with me this go around, man.
It's good. I mean, we're doing a Halloween movie, so it's okay to be a little monstrous in our coughing and recording.
Yeah, anytime I laugh, just like, can you mute him, please? This is a mess. But like you said, we are coming into the Halloween season, if we're going to date our podcast right here and now. And it gives us a great excuse to look at some Halloween movies and say, hey, what are good stories that we can find that relate to Jesus, even in a season like Halloween? Believe it or not, a great opportunity to still see Jesus in these stories that we're either unfamiliar or very familiar with. And the first that we want to jump into here this Halloween season is the movie Hotel Transylvania. And Simon, this is one for me that I had never seen. You brought this one up saying, hey, this would be a great one to cover. It's one that you and your family have watched, but this was brand new territory for me.
And I think for me, this was one of those movies where I watched it not expecting it to be good. And I was like, you know what? It's okay. And so it just sort of surprised us a little bit. And I think there's a few of them now.
There are four of them.
Four of them.
Yeah. The fourth one was straight to like Amazon Prime streaming. So, it kind of went into that, what is now the straight to DVD or straight to VHS
now
movies.
That you say that, it kind of made me think maybe we started that one and then none of the voice cast is there. So it's like, no. Do I want to hear someone doing their Adam Sandler impression for an hour and a half? No, I do not.
No, it's not a great hang. Not just Adam Sandler impression, but like the Dracula impression of Adam Sandler impression, right? Like there's too much. There's too much distance.
I'll put that flea in a box, and then I'll put that box inside of another box.
That is a tightrope to walk, and there's probably not a way to do it. You're just going to fall off, right?
That's right. This is exactly how I felt kind of walking away from it, was going, oh, that was okay, right? Yeah. I think there are some good stories to learn from in this movie that we'll get to, but this is one of those of like, we pulled it off the shelf, I think not because it's this big award-winning classic movie, but I think it's definitely one that as our kids grow up, it's one of those that will be pretty easy to pull off the shelf for them as kids of saying, this is just a goofy movie, goofy, silly movie. And you need those. We're going to turn off our brain and we're going to have some fun and laugh at these really dumb jokes.
Especially in a Halloween season where a lot of the movies that are cherished around this time, depending on where your kids are at with, monsters and things that might be scaring them at night.
My wife and I just recently watched Hocus Pocus and then went, that's a little spookier or scarier at moments than I remembered it was.
Yep. And you even go through the first 10 minutes of that one. You're like, I can't introduce this one too early.
Oh, they're murdering those witches. Cool, we'll avoid that conversation right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So this movie came out in 2012, so it's 8 years old now, and again has had 3 sequels that have followed along the way. So,
did you say 2012?
Yeah,
that's 12 years ago now, my friend.
Is that 12? Is that how math works?
I took math for elementary school teachers in college.
I took math for daily living in college. And none of the math that we learned there was going to be in my daily life. I can tell you that. We get into like week 2 and they're like, let's talk about imaginary numbers. And I'm like, I'm imagining quitting this class right now. How old is this movie?
This movie is 12 years old.
This movie is 12 years old. It can't quite drive, but it feels like it should. So Simon, help us dial back the clock 12 years and lay kind of an overview of Hotel Transylvania on us.
Hotel Transylvania is set in a luxury hotel for monsters, owned by Count Dracula. The hotel serves as a sanctuary where creatures like Frankenstein, werewolves, and others can relax, or in the mummy's case, unwind, all safely away from humans. The plot centers on Dracula's overprotective relationship with his daughter Mavis as she reaches her 118th birthday and desires more independence and to spread her wings. When a human named Johnny accidentally stumbles into the hotel, chaos ensues as Dracula tries to hide Johnny's identity and get him out of the hotel while Mavis at the same time starts falling for him. The movie explores themes of family, acceptance, and discovers that true love is built on trust.
All right, Simon, let's talk about some movie magic. And right off the bat, we're going to talk about what did people think of this movie when it first came out? How has this landed with the world?
I am really interested to see, because I have not looked at what Rotten Tomatoes or what anybody has said about it. And this will be an interesting one.
Batter up, man, because here we go. This movie has a 44% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay.
It is not fresh.
Not fresh.
And it has a 72% audience score. Ooh. Which is probably the biggest disparity that we have seen in any movie that we've covered so far. So 44% with the critics, 72% on the audience score, which is really not surprising to me.
The disparity between those two ratings can be summed up in our two reactions like, oh, this is okay. Like, that's what it was.
That's great. And probably true. I would say if we had to do like an assessment of most Adam Sandler movies, I would bet that you would see very similar trend lines. I bet if you were to look at a Billy Madison or if you look at a Happy Gilmore, I bet critics are going to be like, yes, this is real dumb. And then audiences being like, it is. And we love it because of that.
Adam Sandler has his finger on the pulse of just crowd pleaser movies.
That's exactly right. And I believe he's been quoted in interviews before saying like, as long as you will keep giving me money for these, why would I stop making them?
Beat it! Leave me alone! I'm sorry, babe. I didn't mean that.
Yes.
People are still going and watching the movies, right? But just a little bit of interesting backstory on this movie. It was originally developed by a comedy writer, Todd Durham, who on his own created a plan for how this idea of like, quote, Hotel Transylvania could be a larger world or like a franchise. He developed this plan of how it could be several films, a television series, holiday TV specials, video games, books, merchandise, hotels, and even theme parks. And he made all of this kind of in his mind, built it into a plan, built it into a package that like on his own, unsolicited, took it to Columbia Pictures and like presented it. Just like, this is what I've made. This is what I've got.
Behold, my stuff.
And then they saw that and took it to Sony Pictures Animation, where he then became one of the screenwriters on the project.
Really?
So this is like his baby.
This is like a full-fleshed idea. Like nobody asked him to. Asked you to do this, man.
Yeah, nobody asked for this, right? But packaged it up, took it to them, and he got to become one of the scriptwriters on the project. In the process, as they then handed out to a director and studio and made the movie happen. They signed off.
That's a cool story.
It is. I thought that was pretty neat. I was like, wow, this guy kind of took his labor of love and went, here, you want to do something with this?
Yeah.
And they said, yes, that's pretty cool.
I've thought of everything.
All that to say, this movie cost $85 million to make and then hauled in $148 million domestically and $210 internationally for a total of $358 million. Wow. So for its first film, it brought in about 4 times what its budget was. So it did just great, which is likely then would lead it to having these 3 sequels that it's had since. So it may have been a bit of a critically panned movie, but it was really a smash at the box office for this studio and inspired really kind of this movement of movies that followed after.
I think the movie magic for this movie is really kind of at the heart of what makes Adam Sandler movies good. He plays the sort of family man so well. It seems like he brings that into every one of his movies. And he also has some of the same cast of friends around him all the time, too. Like it becomes something of a trope, but we all seem to kind of like it. And
right. That's well said. Every movie that Adam Sandler has, there's usually going to be at least one of the 5 dudes essentially that are in this movie.
Yes.
Whether it's David Spade, Kevin James, Steve Buscemi, or like kind of the 3 around him in this one.
Yes.
And then you usually have Chris Rock sometimes in the mix there too. I mean, they're all kind of from the same comedy era. And you're right. A trope is a great way to put it. You're usually waiting to go like, where are they? Where will they be in this movie? And I remember that's what made Grown Ups such an interesting and fun movie when it came out. Because it was like, finally, all of these guys are in this movie together. They've been separately in all these different projects, or it seems like they're related in the same comedy sphere. And finally, we got them under one roof for a movie.
Oh, yeah. It's all coming together.
From a chemistry standpoint, there's some real benefits to that. Because he makes family movies, he kind of makes them a family affair most of the time. Like,
that's such a great way to say that.
A member of his family or his functional family with his friends and stuff like that. And so you're just going to bring family into the project. I think that generally comes through.
I think so too. What I kind of thought was some movie magic really was like the cast is packed. And a part of me loved it and a part of me hated it. Because I know it's the trope of like, oh yeah, this is the crew you have for every movie, right? You're basically getting together your friends all over again. But then I look at that and go like, if I were making movies and had the opportunity to do that with some like best friends that I made along the way, or like my college roommates, that would be a dream come true.
You can't fault him for it, because if it works, it works. And that's probably what I would want to do in that situation as well.
That's exactly right. And I know I had moments with my college friends where it felt like we could riff on something. It was the funniest thing that we'd ever produced. And I'll never find that magic again. And I'm sure someone outside down the hall was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, right?
Yes.
But we were having a blast, which I think is what some of that magic is. You get together in the room with your buddies and you just let it cook.
And I think we would be hypocritical if we didn't acknowledge that we are, in fact, two friends on a podcast doing something creative together. So, like, it would be hypocritical of us to say, Adam Sandler, why in the heck would you want to keep doing that?
I think the other piece of movie magic for me is just like the continued bits throughout this movie. It's one of those. You feel like there's a hidden joke maybe hiding behind some of those as you go along too. Like whether it's with the cast or the team of the movie, there's these moments where you're like, that's generally funny, but I bet there's something else tied to that makes it even funnier.
Yes.
Or there's these little recurring gags throughout the movie that you are not going to catch in your first viewing that I'm sure if I went back and watched again, I would find more funny. They end up becoming like your own personal cult classics that way, I think. And so I think there's some magic hiding in that. And I think one of my favorite little like hints of humor in there, not acknowledged at all, when Dracula gets up to give his speech, like welcoming them to the party and like scaring them off about humans again, he stands on this pile of frogs and he stands up and you're like, what is, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a toadstool. It's a toadstool is what he's standing on. Like, and there's just this one faint like that happens like as he stands on it. And I'm like, that's gold. That's great. It's so dumb and it's so perfect.
The other thing along with that, Adam Sandler's voicing and, you know, his voice is so similar in a lot of the things that he does, and it's just slight tweaks to it.
Yes.
And even the singing, I'm like, sometimes I hear it and I'm like, why don't we hate this? It's like, I should dislike this, but I don't. It's the same thing every time, but it's good.
I know what's coming here. And that's part of the movie too, was just in general, like, I know what the gag is going to be.
Yes.
Like, I know what joke is about to drop here.
Yes.
And a part of me goes, I hate that. And yet it's so satisfying that
it's
I knew.
Satisfying.
I'm
it
like,
is. And that's one of the reasons why I think that a movie like this is good. While I would not put it on the top of my list for most categories, it's a good story and there are good things that we can find in it. And anytime you can do that, you've got opportunities to talk about Jesus.
All right, Simon, in all of these movies, we believe that if it's a good story, there are elements in here that we can point to Jesus. There are ways where we can see his character and his story and what he's looking to do in the world through these films. And we think that's also true even in Halloween movies and through Hotel Transylvania. And so, Simon, I'm going to throw you up first here and say, what's something in this movie that you think just uniquely belongs to Jesus?
Anytime you have a movie that talks about love, true love, this is a theme that comes up in this movie, particularly in the context of family. And I think that that's an opportunity to talk about Jesus just because this is a place of connection for all of us. But one of the things that jumps out to me right away is this idea that love doesn't seek control. True love trusts. Because we see these two ideas opposed to each other in the beginning of this movie. Drac is trying to protect his daughter, and she's wanting to go out and explore the world. And his response, out of love for her, is to try to manipulate this whole charade so that she ends up turning back and saying, oh yeah, the outside world is terrible.
This whole charade? Is that what you said?
I said charade.
You mean this whole charade, Simon? Are you trying to be fancy on the podcast?
I am so sorry. Pardon my French. I have no idea where that came from.
Okay, so go on. He continues with his charade. Yes.
This elaborate scheme.
Elaborate ruse.
Oh man, I don't even know where to start that again.
He built a fake town, Simon.
Yeah.
He lied.
And so we see this interaction between control and trust in Drac as
Yeah.
he's being a father to a vampire who's turning 118. She's now officially of age, right? And now she wants to go out into the world. And so he's creating this whole elaborate scheme to try to scare her away from humans forever so that she'll never leave home, never leave the hotel. And so we see this sort of manipulative control that he's expressing and saying that this is out of his love for her to protect her. And really, I think that what that does is it undermines what that relationship is, what that trust is. And we see that in our love between God and us. God does not seek love through manipulation and control. He seeks out love through trust and choice and free will. And so even when there's a beautiful passage, you hear it read a lot at weddings out of 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It keeps no record of being wrong. Love is built on trust and makes way for us to choose the right way, right? Choose God's way. And so God does not seek to control us, manipulate the circumstances. He wants an authentic relationship with each and every one of us.
I had the exact same thing highlighted here. And what it made me think of was Galatians 5:1, saying, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." It's for freedom.
Yes.
Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Christ did not come so that he could, hook us in a different way. He came so that we could live life to the fullest out of trust in who he is and what he's done and who God says that he is. And I think sometimes we can get that twisted in our relationship with God and feel like, oh, he's just got all these rules and demands and expectations. And then we kind of spiral and go, I could never, right? And how can I measure up? And I'm not doing enough or I'm not good enough. You can just see where that starts to just roll downhill pretty quickly. And Galatians 5:1 is usually a pretty healthily arresting verse for me to kind of go like, it's for freedom that Christ set you free.
Yes.
Remember what this is all about. When it starts to become burdensome, check yourself a little bit. What's your basis here? Where are your thoughts going? What are you circling around?
And sometimes with Christian freedom, a lot of people look at the Christian life as like the antithesis to freedom. You mean I have to follow all these rules? I have to do all these things. I have to modify my behaviors. I have to submit my life to what the Bible says. That doesn't feel like freedom to a lot of people. But ironically, a lot of the times, which is pretty similar to what Drac does here, he's trying to have freedom from persecution. He's trying to create this safe place, this free place for he and his monster friends and for his daughter to live. And rather than actually achieving that, the means by which he goes to try to uncover and discover that freedom are actually what binds him and his family. This isolation that he binds himself to, this overprotectiveness, that actually becomes a form of slavery for him to maintain, to be doing all the time. And so when we look at the Christian life and we say, man, that doesn't look like freedom to me, the thing that we want to go to pursue, whether it is our own pleasures, whether it is our own, like, I want to use my money the way I want to, I want to love who I want to, I want to do with my body whatever I want to do. Those types of things seem like, look like freedom, but end up becoming slaveries.
A really probably simplistic example that always comes to mind for me is anytime I think about the idea of, would I want to own a motorhome someday? Would I want to own a boat someday? I go like, you can own those things, but at some point, at some level, there's this threshold where it
also owns you,
right?
Yeah.
And I go like, because I could feel the freedom and excitement of like owning a boat.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, I gotta have a place to store the boat, and that's gonna cost money. I gotta register the boat, and that's gonna cost money. I gotta maintain the boat. I gotta go out and spend my time to go get the boat out and then go put the boat away.
It
and
feels
then go
like
do the weekend with the boat.
It feels like you have a lot against boats. And as a boat owner, I really take umbrage.
Can we call your shanty sled on water a boat? Is that what we're calling it? Is it registered? It has numbers on it?
Yeah, it is officially
okay, then it counts
licensed.
as a boat. In the eyes of the law, it is a boat.
Yes. Although it is old enough that in a year from now, it's no longer insurable because it's too old.
Oh, it's 118. This is great.
Yeah.
I think what's related to this for me and what belongs to Jesus is the big headline that I wrote down was that fear is a terrible motivator. And Dracula and all of this, kind of his sense of control really comes out of this motivation of fear of losing his daughter like he lost his wife. And fear makes you do things you don't think you'd ever do. rational, irrational. It will drive you to certain points or just kind of these gut reactions, or it'll make you fester and become something you never wanted to be, or make you start to think things you never thought you would think, or you magically one day realize, how did I get here? And fear can be one of those sneaky things. And one of the lines he uses when talking to, what's his name, Johnny?
Yeah, Johnny.
Is that as a father, you do everything to keep your family safe, even if you have to break their trust.
Ooh, yeah.
And as a husband, as a father, there is a bone in me somewhere that goes, hey, I do want to do everything in my power to keep my family safe, but I don't want to break their trust, right?
And
there's something there.
And that's the part of the movie where we're like, oh, there's something wrong there. Like, oh, yes, we want to protect him. We want to keep him safe. We agree. Yep. Even if it means breaking their trust. Oh, that doesn't feel right.
But what's interesting is I think that is probably a very common thing that most people would say, yeah, I get it. That's not an uncommon thing. It's like, hey, the means justify the ends. It's like, hey, if it means my family's going to be safe, if it means that it's going to get them where they need to go, well, then the means don't matter, right? Because it means I'm going to protect them and keep them safe. Yeah. And I think that's the danger we play with there, because you're going to start to build a foundation that's just not real, or it's not trustworthy.
Yes, and that's a really good point. When he's talking about you love your daughter so much that you do anything, even if it means breaking her trust, that's a counterfeit form of love. And when we look at God and we look at the relationship that he desires with us, it is rich, it is deep, it is founded and built on trust and not control. We are created in the image of God. We have his gift of free will so that when we do choose to love and serve and follow, even angels wonder at these things.
And where I think that really comes to a head was later in the movie, really at the dance party of all places, right?
The dance party, yes.
Dracula says, if you went out and something happens, I couldn't live with myself. And Mavis immediately turns and says, but you can live with this? Right? There's this trade-off of, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe. And exactly like you said, it results in this undermining of that trusting, intimate, real relationship as a result. She may be safe. She may be under your roof, but your relationship is not going to be the same. It's not going to be what you really want. It's not what you're actually seeking. And it makes me think a lot of family dynamics. I know in my family naturally are conflict avoiders. We're pretty positive people. It is not fun for us to engage in conflict. And so moment of vulnerability here. Those conversations are hard for my family. We don't like to tread into those zones because it might be painful and we might hurt each other's feelings. And there's this crazy thing that happens when we choose to ignore those conflicts where they become unsettled, or they become these passive aggressive things shrouded in lots of positivity and kindness, or we just don't talk about those things. But there's certain places like, oh, we probably can't go there. Like, I just know that. And so you lose a little bit of that intimacy that way. But there are these magical moments in my family where it's like, oh, we had a really hard conversation. And I hated every moment of that. I hated opening that. I hated leading up to that. The conversation may have been hard, but 9 times out of 10 on the other side of that conversation, a little more real. We understand each other better. I have put myself in a place of vulnerability and trust to go there, knowing it may not work out. It may not be good, but I love you enough to extend that.
Yes.
And usually you come out on the other side stronger and closer than you were before, because you were actually authentic and your real self with somebody, right? And I think we get a great example of that here of like, do you want to choose real love that's hard and takes real work and is probably more sacrificial? Or do you want this counterfeit type of love that you just kind of get to control and manipulate your way into?
And to the credit of this character, Drac does come around. He does choose the better path here and chooses trust and chooses this acceptance and love of his daughter and chooses to trust her and her relationship with the outside world, right? We see that come around. And I think it's a pretty safe way to interact with those dynamics that in many families, I think it is a real thing.
Yeah, out of the best of intentions.
Totally.
I feel like I love you. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I feel like I can kind of project or understand where you're going already, or I can place myself in your shoes, or how could I possibly call this out? I know that you're going through XYZ, right? Like sometimes we just anticipate or preface our way out of those concerns too. It takes a lot of forms, but this does a great job of starting to lean into vulnerability through choosing to be real about your feelings.
Another thing that belongs to Jesus in this movie is this idea of isolation as opposed to reconciliation and forgiveness. Because what we discover through the story is that at the heart of this overprotective drive is a tragedy. Something that happens that shouldn't have happened. He's been hurt by the world. So this movie shows us if you've been hurt by the world, this isolation won't bring you the peace that you're looking for. And I think that we watch Drax's response to persecution and pain is isolation and removal from the world, protection. And, it's kind of comically done of having like a labyrinth of escape tunnels, this forest, wrapped around like all of these different layers of protection around this Hotel Transylvania. And this is supposed to be a place of sanctuary and human free since 1898, right? Like all of these things that it's comically heightened, this isolation. And he believes that he's created this sanctuary, but that's not really how the world works. And that's not really how peace works either, when we've been hurt or when we've been wronged. We talk about this dynamic between Drac and Mavis, but another relationship that's really important through this movie that's kind of interesting is this relationship between Drac and Johnny.
Yeah.
And we watch this sort of reconciliation, this forgiveness happen, because Drac has to come face to face with the object of his like hatred, his isolation, what he's protecting against. He has to come face to face with this human, Andy Samberg, as a backpacker. Like,
and all of his terrible devices hiding in his backpack that will steal Dracula's soul.
Yes. But that relationship ends up becoming a place of reconciliation and forgiveness that
really
leads to a new place of peace for Drac. And I think that that's something that belongs to Jesus, because while it seems counterintuitive, when we're hurt, we want to shrink away from something that hurt us. That is human nature in a lot of ways. We want to shrink away. We want to protect ourselves in the interest of self-preservation. But when we choose to follow Jesus, we hear things like, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And when you come face to face with those things in your real life and you have to step into obeying those things, wow, that's a hard thing. That goes against a lot of what is in our hearts. But when we do that, we discover that's the true path to peace, not by isolation, but by forgiveness and reconciliation.
My last thing that belonged to Jesus really was that theme of acceptance of others. Exactly what you're talking about. The phrase that I use often in my own life is distance breeds distortion.
I love that.
Sure enough, when you get close to somebody, again, when you get close to a group of people or individual, you start to remember or discover what's actually true about them. The further I get, the less time I spend with somebody, the less I'm face to face, the easier it is for me to make assumptions about who they are or what their motivation is or what they're going to anticipate or how they're going to respond or react. And so that really resonated with me. You have Drac as a character who literally has not seen humans probably since this thing occurred, right?
Since 1898,
and has a certain
man.
cemented perspective of what they're like. And it made me think of like, this classic humans versus monsters, that they turn on its head to be like monsters versus humans. But then I could draw that back to the biblical story and go like, the Samaritans versus the Jews who never got along until Jesus started to bridge these divides. Or you look today and I go, Democrats, Republicans, right?
Gosh,
you look at these political divides that we have, and I think of Drag's quote when he's shaking his hand at the picture of the baby going, "Evil villain, you will never win." And instead, Jesus offers this very different picture. We get it from Paul in Romans 15:7, where he says, "Accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God." It is really easy when something happens to us that is tragic. There's all sorts of grief, and you're right, natural reactions. And it's easy to create those barriers to try and protect ourselves and then not realize how those same things you've used to protect yourself have become the barriers that are going to hold you back now.
Yeah.
It's that same way of like, I learned how to protect myself, and this is the only way I learned how to protect myself. And so the more that I cling to those, those are going to undo me later if I don't learn to either grow out of that or adapt. And you're right, it creates distance, and then we lose sight of what people are really like. And then Jesus reminds us, hey, accept them because I accepted you. Enter back into the relationship, enter back into that vulnerable place to be present and see them and discover them. You're going to have to go spend time with a human. You're going to have to go spend time with a monster to actually know what they're like and start to understand that, hey, I love them in the same way that I love you. And I want you to understand that.
And there was a really great scene where we kind of saw that acceptance that you're talking about get played out all in one scene, where it's like the floating tables. And there's
such a fun scene.
It's a fun scene.
It felt like a cutaway almost from the whole movie. I'm like, what is this? This is great.
It is great. And like you have some of these like surfer vibes from Johnny's character.
But then you also get like these battle plan, like aviation tactics, I'm like, what a combination of things.
Yeah, I think the magic of that scene is like you're seeing that acceptance happen in real time. and this
Yeah.
appreciation of each other, and the distance that had, to quote you, this distance that had breeded such distortion was coming together, and acceptance was kind of born out of that. And I think there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, the moment Johnny flies between those tables and Drac goes, oh,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, there it is. That's right.
Yeah.
You guys know how to have fun together.
The last theme that I really saw in this movie that reminded me of Jesus, that reminded me of that walk as a Christian, is that when we follow Jesus, when we claim the Christian faith, following Jesus ends our division, but not our distinction.
Yeah.
So we see humans and monsters come together in this movie and kind of united in love. Love is this theme that kind of also is a thread throughout this movie. And they talk about it in terms of the zing and like all of these different things, right? But this united in love, this dance party at the end is a really cool thing that everybody's acknowledging their differences and distinctions, and the division is gone. And I think that that's the beauty of the world that Jesus calls us to, is not that we would be uniform to one another, but that we would be unified with one another. Following Jesus should break down the divisions that we have between people without diminishing the distinctions that do set us apart and make us unique. And I think that verse at the end of Galatians 3, and this is misquoted all the time, but there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, nor there's male and female, for you all are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Jesus, then you are Abraham's seed, which means you're part of the family of God and heirs according to the promise.
What I heard from you is that Jesus wants us to have more 2012 era dance parties, is what I heard. My image of heaven someday will be like there's some place where we can go and do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always imagined the hymns of heaven sounding a little different than that, but maybe. Let's do it.
Who are you to limit heaven, Simon?
No, yeah, exactly.
All right, Simon, time for some love it or leave it. An opportunity for us to talk about what we loved and what we could have done without along the way.
Let's go.
So, Simon, my very first love it or leave it for you is simply the voice of Adam Sandler as Dracula.
Yeah, this is one of those things, like, I feel like I should hate it, but I do love it. I should hate it because the Transylvania accent and the Dracula thing is so cheap sometimes, and but it's so him, and it's just good.
The fact that he leans into it and owns it, I was like right in the middle. We're like at the beginning of the movie, I'm like, I hate this. Like, you're leaning too far into the stereotype, but you still sound like Adam Sandler.
It's okay, we all get stomach aches, Mr. Bigfoot.
And my brain can't like separate the difference between the two. And at some point in the movie, I just forgot.
I know. And another more recent Adam Sandler experience of the same thing is that movie Leo. It's on Netflix.
He's like a lizard?
He's a lizard.
Ah, okay.
And at first I'm like, I hate this. And then you're like, oh man, I kind of like it.
And now I kind of hate myself because I like it.
But this is one of those too where it's like, okay, you did it again. I'm in. I've got a rundown. I don't know how we want to do this, but I wanted to kind of run down the cast because we talked about the uniqueness of Adam Sandler cast. There's a lot of common names in there, but I wanted to see how well you think these actors or actresses fit. So, love or leave it, rapid fire. Kevin James is Frankenstein.
Leave it.
Okay, tell me why.
I think Kevin James like fits the type in my head as like a Frankenstein. Yeah. I get it. I get how he got there. Him voicing that, I'm just like, this is just a dude being Frankenstein. It could have been anybody.
Okay. Now, Fran Drescher as Eunice, Frankenstein's bride.
Oh, I'm a sucker for Fran Drescher.
Me too.
Like, I just have such a bias.
That's a love it for me as well.
That's great. I think it's because they own that with like the jokes of like her own self-deprecating humor she's always had. Of like, they're so loud, they're so noisy, as she screams her lines, in her very unique voice. And I just went like, she's almost always like, a love it for me.
Why don't we have more Fran Drescher voice acting? Like, why don't we have more of that?
Everyone would go, Fran Drescher, But it works here. It works really well.
Okay, going on down the list here, Andy Samberg as Johnny.
That's so tough for me because he's just such like a dumpy dude. But like that's part of the magic of it, And so I think I'd have to say love it. I think it works. Just no part of it was believable to me that they were like old enough to be in a serious relationship, though. That's where I think it breaks down.
Selena Gomez as Mavis.
Love it. Yeah, her voice fits that character really well. That was something that felt seamless to me. You bet.
Sadie Sandler as young Mavis and Winnie the Werewolf.
I did not get any of what you just said.
Okay.
None of that meant anything to me.
So Sadie Sandler, daughter.
Oh, okay.
Adam
Okay.
Sandler.
I'm catching
Okay.
on. All right.
Okay.
That's a total love it. And the opportunity
Me
to get
too.
to bring your kids into the mix there, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
great.
Done.
10 out of 10, over and over, love it.
David Spade as Invisible Man.
That's a love it for sure. That's perfect for him. Just the attitude he has and the vibe of a character like that. That's like sassy, but like forgotten. You bet.
Yes.
Love it.
Yeah. He's another one I was like, we need more voice acting with David Spade. Please and thank you.
Why isn't there a sequel to Emperor's New Groove? That's what I'm asking. Give us what we want, Disney.
Yes.
Enough of this other garbage. Let's go.
Well, they've been renewing all other IP.
Yeah,
like,
we'll
why
do,
not?
we'll
Like,
do live action for everything except for the best early
Yes.
2000s animation projects they've ever done.
Yes.
You know, my top 3 there, man. My holy grail trinity of that era
Ooh.
is going to be Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, and Treasure Planet.
Now, Treasure Planet, that's a little deeper. But I mean, really, both Atlantis and Treasure Planet are deep tracks. So good job there.
They're
They
great.
are good.
I will fight someone all day on those being towards
I
the
won't
top of the
fight you.
mountain of Disney
In
greats.
fact, I think Atlantis would be a really good episode.
I think it would too.
It'd be a really
Mark
good
it.
episode.
Put it down.
It only took me 10 seconds.
Steve Buscemi as Wayne the Werewolf.
Leave it, man.
Oh, really?
I love
Okay.
Steve Buscemi. I would love him in the movie. I don't want him in this role. I like
Oh,
the
really?
werewolf characters in general. I'm like, y'all are bumming me out, man. Like, I get like the tropes we're playing on here. But every time I watch him on screen, like whether it was the panting of him breathing heavily, like all these dog tropes, I was just like, ugh. I have a dog at home and I do not want to relive any of this here.
I kind of liked it. So this is where we're going to differ. Just because the inverse of what you just said, though, because he was kind of gross and like, oh, this guy's the worst. That's such a great Steve Buscemi role, I think.
I'll give
Yeah,
you that. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm still going to say leave it because I'm like, you are not a great character in this, but
Yeah.
I can see how it ties the threads there.
Okay, Molly Shannon as Wanda the Werewolf.
Indifferent, you know, I'm like, she doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, but like, I'm like, eh.
And that's where I take issue. This is a leave it for me because it's like, if you have Molly Shannon, let her be Molly Shannon. What are we
that's true.
doing here?
That's a good point. She was too
What are we-
much of a straight character. That's where I think
Yes.
the leave it is.
Yes.
If she doesn't have like
She's
the crazy
gotta have a little
eyes,
bit
you're
of
like,
crazy.
okay, we missed our mark here.
And
yeah.
this is a comedy. Don't let her be a bench player. Like, she's funny.
Yeah, I love that take. I think that's great.
Jason Lovitz, Quasimodo.
That's a love it. That's a real big love it for me.
Yeah.
That was one of my, like,
Just
at
weird.
first I was like, do I need to care about this character? When he first got introduced, because it's like a part of like the lobby or whatever.
Yeah. Do I have
He's
to
like-
pay attention to
He
him?
like whips around to his like
Yeah.
second in command chef. He's like, go make this. I told you this. Bang. You know, I'm like, there's a slapstick element that I'm like, yeah, I'm here for that. I like that. I thought that might have just been the gag, right? Like that was
Yeah,
it.
that's it.
But then
That's
it like
it.
comes back again of like him like
Uh-huh.
picking on him with his like overdone accent, you know, as a chef.
He's,
I'm like,
he's the one that is threatening to expose Johnny the most.
right.
Yeah.
But for him to have that like overdone like French accent as a chef and to be Quasimodo and that his rat's name is
I don't know
Esmeralda,
that.
the love
Esmeralda,
interest
yes.
of Quasimodo.
Oh, I
just
missed that.
I go like, that's great.
That is great. I
10 out
missed
of
that.
10.
CeeLo Green as Mummy.
Oh my gosh, leave it. Leave it. Run for the hills. Like this was
know.
you don't know what his future holds when they make this movie, right? Like it's
know.
always that thing where you look back and you go, "Oh, that's problematic. That did not age well," right? But
Like,
even
what are
in
you
this
doing here?
yeah, even in this movie, I go like, you couldn't have found one of your other buddies to be a mummy in here. Like he doesn't even lend any like singing work later. Like the singing he does at the end is all auto-tuned, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a waste.
You're not adding anything like musically for his character that I feel like you
No.
would need. And so I go like, what contract thing somewhere did Sony have to like sign off on that they said they'd put him in a movie or something? Like there has to be
Yeah.
some other reason here because
Yeah.
he's like the oddball here. So that's a leave it. Love it or leave it. The continued reference by Drac to humans taking your candy.
I like that. There are so many little father lines, like dad lines, that he sprinkles through in here of like little means of control for your kid. And we had talked a lot about that dynamic earlier, but like that's funny.
That was
It's
something that
funny.
I picked up on like halfway through the movie. I don't know when my brain like caught that, but it was when he was talking to Mavis with like the bedtime stories, like, and then they'll take your candy. She's like, no, don't take my candy. And then he's giving the people in the hotel the speech. He's like, to crack our heads open and fill them with candy. And I'm like, what? then he makes like
Yes.
another reference when she's in the village and the fake villagers are chasing him. They're like, "Give us your candy."
Yes.
Why
I
is this
know.
the lead?
I know.
It's like this anti-Halloween. It's like a play on trick-or-treating
Yes.
somewhere, you know? That was such like a great recurring bit for me.
It is love it in a family movie because that's going to be funny to parents because it's like, oh man, there's some funny little lies that you tell your kids. Oh man, that movie on Disney Plus. Well, I'm sorry, honey, that one doesn't work. You know, like that doesn't work for us. You know, like it's like those
Yeah, like
types of
that's what
things.
we tell
I
our
don't
daughter
know.
right now of like, oh no, videos only work on grandpa and grandma's phones. Like we don't have videos on our phones. No.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Love it or leave it, the continued nicknames for Mavis throughout this movie.
Okay,
For-
what are do you
For
have-
example,
do you
some of
have
the ones
some?
that I
Yes,
caught
please.
along the way, and they're all from Drac throughout the movie.
Uh-huh.
As he talks to Mavis, he's always inserting these little
Yep,
nicknames
yep.
for her. So, Mavy Wavy, My
Yep.
Little Mouse, My Sweet Little Blood Orange, Precious Bones, Love Droppings, and Devil Chops.
Love droppings and blood orange are my favorite.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I
that's
know there's a
funny.
lot more. Those are just the ones where I was like, yeah, you're right there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad you took the time to get each of those because that is great. I love that. Love it or leave it, the idea of this zing, kind of like love at first sight kind of zing thing. Okay, what do you think about that?
This
in
is great because
movie?
it's related to my last love or leave it. I'm going to hit you with here at the
Okay,
end.
good.
The idea in general, I think is good. I don't think I liked any way that they described it as like a zing. I don't think we needed to call it something special or different.
Yes!
Yeah, love at first sight.
That was probably one of the parts in this movie of the guy who like wrote this whole thing and came up with the theme park.
Don't
He's
put
like,
him in that spot.
And I have this thing.
Thing
I'm going to
called
call
a
it the zing. And
They
he's
were like, okay.
and probably walked into that screenwriters meeting. He's like, okay, this is a hill I'm going to die on. This is a must have. I must have zing.
I
in
like
this
this
movie.
story that you've built. This is great. This is how it gets here.
I mean, that's my theory because otherwise it's just you look at that device and you're like, is that needed? You had to explain it almost any time you brought it up in the movie.
I didn't even realize that's what they were talking about.
Exactly.
Until like
the
three-quarters
first
of the
time,
way through.
yes.
And I was like,
I remember
what?
that.
And then,
yes.
like, for the mom's book to be related around
Yes.
that, you only zing once. I was like, that sounds not great.
And you get to the end of the movie and they land it with that, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
And you're like,
All right.
was that worth it? Probably not.
And so my last love it or leave it for you, Simon, is exactly off that, where I go, the song at the end, the zing song, love
Mhm.
it or leave it.
I would love it if you would just read the lyrics of that song.
That's great because I have them pulled up right here, ready to go.
You do?
I do.
I will give my reaction as this goes. Yes,
Excellent.
please continue.
The chorus goes as such. Zinging in the air, and I don't have a care. I'm winging from the zing that we share.
No, hate.
Zinging in the rain, now I'm feeling no pain. It's real, time for celebrating, 'cause you're my zing.
Leave it. Especially that rhyming at the end. You can't even call it a rhyme.
And
That
I remember
fails. Yeah,
I
that
got
fails
to the
every
end of the
metric.
movie, and I immediately went like, oh, we get to the trope of the end of most animated movies we had for a long time of like, oh, there's a song at the end.
Oh, and even
Okay.
maybe this is an endearing Adam Sandler song. No.
I would probably put up there as the worst end of an animation movie song. I think probably the worst one that I've heard.
And don't they like remix some of it during the credits or whatever and the different characters are
Oh, I definitely did not watch past that. I got to the end of that and I was like, okay, done. Watch
And
the movie.
I could-
but it was one of those like, as they sang it, I was like, are they laughing about how bad this is as they sing it? You know, it's that thing of like,
Yeah.
they sing it and I can picture Selena Gomez being like, oh no. Like,
Oh,
oh,
no.
okay. Well, I guess I got paid to do that. Well, Simon, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks again for joining us for episode 16. We hope that this has been a fun one for you, but our greatest desire is that this is doing for you what it's doing for us, shaping the way we watch movies and sparking spiritual conversations around them.
And we would love to keep the conversation going with you because we know there are all sorts of other good stories, awesome nuances, and details to explore. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, insights, and questions on Instagram or on Facebook at All Good Stories Podcast. We would love to keep the conversation going, hearing about your favorite movie monsters, and keep learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure to make it a good one.